The full moon cast its silver light across the jagged peaks of Moonshadow Mountains, but inside the fortress of the Lycan King, the shadows moved with a life of their own. Tonight was the feast of the fated, a night when alliances were sealed, secrets revealed, and destinies entwined, but nothing could have prepared her for what awaited. She had been chosen, a mail-order bride, summoned to a world she had never seen, into a life she had never imagined. The corridors were cold, the walls heavy with history, and every whisper seemed to carry judgment. And then she saw him, the Lycan King, Calvaroth, his amber eyes glowing with a power both terrifying and magnetic, fixed on her the instant she entered the hall. There was something in that gaze that made her heart seize, a recognition she could not explain, a pull she could not resist. Yet before she could even take a step forward, chaos erupted. A rival alpha, shadowed and dangerous, had infiltrated the feast, his intent clear. In that instant, she realized the life she had been summoned to was not just about duty or marriage. It was about survival, power, and a love that had existed long before they even met. The full moon hung heavy over the jagged peaks of the Moonshadow Mountains, painting the snow in a ghostly silver. Inside the grand hall of the Lycan King's fortress, torchlight flickered over ancient stone walls etched with the history of centuries of powerful Lycan rulers. Servants hurried along the corridors, carrying golden trays of spiced meats and wine, while nobles in fur-lined silks whispered behind gloved hands. Tonight was the feast of the fated, a night where alliances were sealed, debts repaid, and hearts sometimes stolen. In the highest tower of the fortress, the Lycan King Calvaroth stood by the arched window, gazing down at the winding road that led to his domain. His amber eyes burned with a mix of anticipation and unease. He had heard of her long before her arrival, the mail-order bride chosen for him by his council. And yet, despite the political nature of this arrangement, Cale felt something he had not felt in decades: curiosity, a strange tug at his heart. "She comes tonight," a voice murmured behind him. It was Riona, his most trusted advisor, and the only one who dared to address the king without fear. Cale turned, his expression unreadable. "And if she disappoints me?" Riona's lips curled into a faint smile. "Then you will know, my king, that fate has a cruel sense of humor. But somehow I do not think she will disappoint." Hours later, as the first guests arrived for the feast, the great doors of the hall swung open. A flurry of anticipation swept through the crowd. All eyes turned toward the figure standing in the doorway, a woman draped in a simple gown, her hair a cascade of dark waves, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. She was smaller than he had imagined, delicate in a way that seemed almost fragile against the grandeur of his fortress. Cale's heart, normally guarded and cold as the mountain stones themselves, thudded in his chest. He could not explain it, but in that moment, he knew that she was not just another bride. She was something extraordinary. And then, the whisper spread through the hall like wildfire. She had arrived late, against the usual customs. The council had warned her, arrival after the feast was forbidden. Yet here she was, standing at the threshold of destiny, frozen under the weight of 100 watching eyes. Cale descended from his throne, his long black cloak trailing like a shadow across the marble floor. The hall fell silent. Even the clinking of silverware against plates seemed to stop in mid-air. He stopped mere feet from her, studying her as though the very moonlight had sculpted her from some fragile dream. "You are late," he said, his voice low, commanding, yet carrying an undercurrent of something softer, something dangerous. I am sorry, Your Majesty," she whispered, barely audible. Her hands trembled at her sides, and Cale noticed the faint tremor in her jaw. But there was a fire in her eyes, sharp and unyielding, that defied the cold majesty of the Lycan throne. Something about her ignited a storm within him, a mixture of frustration, fascination, and desire. Before he could speak again, a commotion erupted at the far end of the hall. Nobles were murmuring, pointing toward a shadowed corner. Cale followed their gaze and froze. A figure, cloaked and hooded, stepped forward. The room seemed to hold its breath as the stranger revealed himself, a rival alpha from a neighboring pack, a wolf whose grudge had simmered for years. His eyes locked on the bride, and Cale's protective instincts flared. "What is this?" Cale demanded, moving swiftly to position himself between the woman and the intruder. His aura shifted, his human form rippling, muscles tensing with the latent power of his wolf. The hall itself seemed to shudder under his presence. The intruder bowed mockingly, smirking. "I see the king's prize has arrived at last. Such a shame she comes unprepared." Kyle's eyes narrowed. "She is under my protection. Speak again, and you will regret it." The stranger's smirk widened, and he vanished into the crowd before Cal could act. But the damage was done. The bride's face had gone pale, her lips trembling. Kyle reached for her hand, brushing it gently. The contact was electric, a current that seemed to surge through them both. "Do not fear," he whispered, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I will keep you safe." For a moment she looked up at him, and in her gaze, Cale saw a reflection of something he had thought lost forever, a spark of hope, of connection, of forbidden longing. The feast continued around them, but for Cale and his bride, time seemed to freeze. Every glance, every breath, every heartbeat pulled them closer to an unspoken destiny, one that neither of them could escape. The grand hall of Moonshadow Fortress buzzed with murmurs and clinking goblets, yet for Cale Veroth, the Lycan King, the crowd had become little more than background noise. His amber eyes never left the bride, the delicate, fierce woman who had dared to arrive late, daring the customs of his pack. Servants began to serve the first course, roasted venison glazed with dark honey and blood, red wine in crystal goblets. Nobles whispered, glancing at the bride with thinly veiled curiosity, speculations curling around her like smoke. She remained frozen near Cale's side, hands clasped tightly in front of her, as though the very weight of centuries of Lycan tradition pressed down on her shoulders. "Do not let them intimidate you," Cale murmured, leaning close enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from his body. The scent of his wolf, earthy, primal, intoxicating, filled her senses, making her pulse race. I don't understand half of this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Everything is so overwhelming." Cale's lips curved in a rare, private smile. "You will learn. Tonight you are not just a guest. You are my bride. And what happens here will change everything." The feast progressed, but the sense of foreboding never left the air. Then, a sudden hush fell over the hall. All eyes turned toward the high dais where the council elders stood. One of them, an elderly alpha with silver-streaked hair and sharp blue eyes, raised a hand. "It is time," the elder announced, his voice echoing against the vaulted stone ceiling. "The ceremonial bond must be witnessed." The bride's stomach dropped. Ceremonial bond, she had not been warned of this. Every step of this night seemed to be a test, a trial she had unknowingly entered. Cale noticed her anxiety, the way her hands shook. His protective instincts flared, his wolf coiling inside him like a spring ready to snap. As she was guided to the center of the hall, a hushed gasp ran through the nobles. They knew this was no ordinary bride. She was different. The air seemed to hum around her, charged with unseen energy. Cale's eyes never left hers, and in that gaze, she found an anchor, a tether to something powerful yet safe. Then, the unexpected happened. A ripple of movement at the far end of the hall drew Cale's attention. An emissary from the rival pack had slipped in among the guests. The rival's eyes locked on the bride with possessive hunger, and in that instant, Cale's wolf rose fully, a shadowy growl vibrating through the air. "You will not touch her," Cale's voice thundered, silencing even the council. The intruder froze, knowing he had crossed an invisible line that no alpha dared to test. But it wasn't just the threat of another alpha that left the bride frozen. As the ceremonial binding began, a secret long buried in Moonshadow Fortress revealed itself. A hidden tapestry on the wall glowed faintly under the moonlight streaming through the stained glass, a family crest that had been thought lost. And etched into it, almost impossibly, was the mark of her lineage. The realization struck her like ice water. She wasn't just a bride chosen at random. Her arrival, her bloodline, her very existence had been foretold centuries ago. She was entwined with the destiny of the Lycan King before she had even taken her first breath. Cal noticed the shock on her face, the frozen disbelief, and he gripped her hands tightly, grounding her. "Look at me," he commanded softly, and she obeyed. "Do not be afraid. Whatever happens, we face it together." Her eyes filled with tears, not just from fear, but from the weight of destiny pressing down on her, and in that moment, the hall seemed to vanish, leaving only the two of them standing amidst shadows and whispers. The ceremonial elders continued, unaware that the very foundation of their traditions had just been shaken. The bride's secret lineage, the uninvited rival Alpha, and the magnetic pull between her and Cale were threads being woven into a tapestry far larger than anyone in the hall could imagine. As the night deepened, she realized that she was no longer a passive participant in this story. Her choices, her courage, and her heart would shape the fate of the Lycan kingdom itself. And Cale, he would not let anyone, any pack, any law, or any shadow, stand in the way of claiming what destiny had already bound to her. The torches flickered, casting long, dancing shadows across the vaulted hall, but the warmth of fire could not reach the chill that had settled over the Moonshadow feast. Guests murmured nervously, sensing that something unprecedented had just begun. Kyle's amber eyes, glowing faintly in the dim light, never left the bride. He could feel her pulse racing, her fear and fascination intertwining in a dangerous, magnetic rhythm. The ceremonial elders continued their chants, weaving words older than memory, but the bride could not focus. Her gaze kept drifting to the tapestry, the secret emblem of her bloodline glowing faintly, revealing the truth she had never expected. She was more than a bride, she was the key, the missing hair of a legacy entwined with the Lycan King himself. Before she could process her thoughts, a sudden crash echoed through the hall. Goblets toppled, plates shattered, and a tense silence fell like a blade. All eyes turned toward the balcony entrance, where the rival Alpha from the neighboring pack appeared again, his face twisted in fury. He had crossed borders, ignored centuries of law, and now he threatened the very sanctity of the king's hall. Kyle's wolf surged within him, muscles tensing, claws flexing. The hall seemed to shrink around him as he moved with predatory grace, stepping between the intruder and his bride. "You dare enter my domain," he growled, his voice a low rumble that vibrated through the stones themselves. The intruder sneered, but there was hesitation in his eyes. He had underestimated Cal's power, and underestimated the force protecting the woman at his side. "She belongs to me," the rival spat. "The council may crown you king, but she is mine by right of claim." The bride gasped, frozen not just by fear but by the intensity of the moment. Cal's hands found hers, gripping tightly, their connection blazing like fire. She could feel his heartbeat, steady and fierce beneath his chest, grounding her, reminding her that she was safe for now. Cal's amber gaze bore into the rival's soul. "You are nothing but a shadow," he said, every word a whip of authority. "She is mine, by destiny and by blood. Leave, or be destroyed." The rival hesitated, sensing the storm coiled within Cale, a wolf that had ruled these mountains for decades. Then, with a curse, he vanished into the shadows of the hall, his presence lingering like a poison in the air. The hall exhaled collectively, but the bride remained frozen, her mind reeling from the revelation of her lineage and the terrifying intensity of the Lycan King's power. Kyle's hand lifted to her cheek, tilting her face so their eyes met. His gaze softened, though the heat beneath it remained scorching. "You have seen what others cannot," he murmured. "You are stronger than you know, and I have loved you before you even stepped into this hall." Her breath caught. The words, unthinkable and impossible, struck her heart like lightning. She had imagined attraction, curiosity, maybe even respect, but love before she arrived, before she had even known him. I don't understand," she whispered, trembling. "How could you love me without knowing me?" Kyle's lips curved into a rare, enigmatic smile. "Because destiny does not wait for understanding. It chooses, and it chose you." The crowd resumed the feast around them, but the bride felt detached from the world. She was caught in a moment suspended between fear, revelation, and an undeniable pull toward the king. Her heart raced, torn between the shock of her bloodline's secrets and the impossible, overwhelming intensity of Cale's gaze. As the moon reached its zenith, the hall grew silent once more. Kyle's hand never left hers, and together they stood at the center of a web of power, destiny, and desire. The bride's frozen state was not just from fear, it was the awe of realizing she had entered a world far larger, far darker, and far more magnetic than she had ever imagined. And as the final torch flickered, shadows shifted along the walls, hinting at the trials yet to come, the enemies still lurking, the secret still hidden, and the fire between the Lycan King and his bride, a flame that would not be denied. The hall had returned to its feasting rhythm, but the bride remained a figure apart, her mind spinning with revelations and fear. Every glance from the nobles felt like a judgment, every whisper a dagger. Cale, sensing her unease, guided her away from the tables and through a side corridor, his hand firm and protective around hers. The corridor was lined with ancient tapestries, each depicting centuries of Lycan history. Cale stopped before one of the largest, a depiction of a king and his mate under a full moon, their eyes glowing with the unmistakable power of bonded souls. His amber gaze turned to her, serious and intense. "You see this?" he asked. "Every Lycan king has had a mate chosen by fate. Some found love, others found duty. But your arrival isn't just duty. You are part of a prophecy that has awaited centuries." Her breath caught. "A prophecy?" "Me." "Yes," Cale said, his voice low, almost a growl. "You are the key to uniting what has long been fractured. Your bloodline is tied to mine, though you do not yet understand how. That is why the rival Alpha sought you." The bride shivered, torn between awe and fear. The world she thought she understood, the one of simple arrangements and cautious dreams, was gone. And in its place was a kingdom of shadows, wolves, and power she had barely begun to comprehend. Kyle stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, the heat of his body and the magnetic pull of his wolf pressing against her. "I have protected this pack for decades," he said, his voice softening. "But for you I will break every law, every tradition, every limit." Her heart pounded in her chest, a wild drumbeat that matched the rise of his own wolf's presence. "Kali," she began, but words failed her. Her pulse, her breath, even the smallest touch from him sent a rush of sensation through her that she had never known before. He brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, his fingers lingering against her skin. "Do you feel it?" he whispered. "The pull between us?" She nodded, shivering. "Yes, but I am afraid. Everything is happening so fast, and I don't even know who I am in this world yet." Kyle's lips hovered near hers, close enough that she could feel his warmth, the subtle growl that rumbled from deep within him. "Then let me show you," he murmured. "I will guide you, but know this, once you step fully into this world, there will be no turning back. Danger waits, desire waits, and I wait for you." Before she could respond, a shadow moved across the corridor, a silent, stealthy figure watching from the darkness. Cale stiffened, sensing the intruder immediately. His wolf instincts flared, and the air thickened with tension. "You're not alone," Cale warned, his body shifting subtly, the strength and danger of his wolf barely contained. The bride's eyes widened. She realized then that this world, the Lycan kingdom, the prophecy, the rival Alpha, and Cale himself, was far more dangerous than she could have imagined. And yet, amid the fear, a strange thrill coursed through her. She had never felt more alive, more desired, or more necessary. Kyle's hand tightened around hers. "Whatever comes," he said, his voice steel and fire, "you will face it with me. And I swear, nothing will harm you as long as I draw breath." The intruder did not advance, for now, but the threat lingered like a shadow at the edge of the light. The bride's frozen state of shock began to melt into something else, determination. If she was to survive, to embrace the destiny Cale had promised, she would need courage, cunning, and the strength to confront both the enemies outside and the storm of desire rising inside her. The moonlight spilled through the corridor, illuminating the two figures standing together in the half-light. Kyle, the Lycan King, powerful and untamed, and the bride, fragile yet fierce, caught between fear and the pull of a destiny she could not ignore. And as the first notes of danger echoed from the hall beyond, the bride realized that nothing, no tradition, no law, no shadow, could prevent what was coming. The world had shifted. The feast had revealed only the beginning. The night outside the fortress had grown darker, the full moon bathing the mountains in silver light, but inside Moonshadow Fortress, shadows danced with a life of their own. The bride and Cale had returned to the hall, but the atmosphere was tense. Whispers of the rival Alpha's audacity spread like wildfire among the nobles. Every glance seemed to carry accusation, every murmur a hidden threat. Kyle's amber eyes scanned the crowd, always returning to her. He could sense her unease, the trembling in her hands, and the flush of fear mixed with something else, something undeniably magnetic. He moved closer, brushing his fingers lightly against hers. "Do not let them see your fear," he murmured, his voice low, a growl threading through it. "Fear makes them bolder." She nodded, trying to steady her racing heartbeat, but before she could respond, a loud crash echoed through the hall. The massive doors at the far end of the hall shattered, splintering into jagged pieces. A dozen shadowy figures poured into the room, rogue wolves from the rival pack, their eyes wild, teeth bared. Chaos erupted instantly. Cal's wolf surged within him. In a heartbeat, he was between her and the attackers, his form radiating raw power. The hall seemed to shrink around him as his presence commanded the attention of friend and foe alike. With a roar that shook the stone walls, he lunged, fangs flashing, claws cutting arcs through the air. The bride froze for a heartbeat, but then instinct took over. She felt something stir deep within her, a warmth, a pulse, a surge of energy she didn't understand. Her hands glowed faintly under the moonlight spilling through the shattered doors, and with a sudden burst, she unleashed a force that sent two attackers sprawling across the floor. Kyle's eyes widened, not in fear, but in awe. "You have power?" he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "I should have known the prophecy isn't just about blood, it's about strength. Yours." The rogue wolves hesitated, sensing the shift in the air. The bride's powers, raw and uncontrolled, flared around her, crackling like lightning in the moonlit hall. She felt Cal's presence behind her, steadying, protective, the heat of him anchoring her. "You're not alone," he growled, moving to shield her. "Together, we are unstoppable." The attackers charged again, but the bride and Cal moved as one. Her newfound abilities surged with each strike, every defensive barrier, every pulse of energy that pushed the rogues back. Cal fought beside her, his claws tearing through the enemy, his growl a symphony of danger and dominance. When the last intruder fell, the hall was silent except for their ragged breaths. Cal turned to her, his eyes burning amber in the torchlight, his chest heaving. "Do you see?" he asked, voice softer now, almost intimate. "You are more than I imagined. More than anyone could have imagined." The bride, still trembling from adrenaline, could hardly believe what had just happened. The fear, the awe, the raw exhilaration, it was overwhelming. Yet in the midst of it, her gaze met Cal's, and something unspoken passed between them, a connection forged in fire and danger. A bond that went beyond words, beyond reason. Kyle reached for her, brushing hair from her face, his thumb grazing her cheek. "This is only the beginning," he whispered. "Enemies will come, secrets will be revealed, but I will protect you. No one will harm you as long as I draw breath, and neither will I let anyone take your heart except me." Her lips parted, and for the first time since her arrival, she felt it, the undeniable pull, the magnetic force drawing her closer to the king she barely knew yet somehow felt she had always belonged to. Outside, the moon bathed the mountains in silver light, silent witnesses to the chaos that had unfolded within. Inside, Cal and his bride stood together, the fortress around them scarred but still standing, a symbol of their growing power, their unbreakable bond, and the fires of desire and destiny that had begun to consume them both.